Number 1.
When Roland and Joan Eaton woke up on May 17, 1975, they had no idea it would be the last morning they would ever spend with their teenage daughter. The Eatons had been married for more than 2 decades and lived in an upper-middle-class neighborhood in Media, Pennsylvania. They had chosen to live in Media because it provided a safe and comfortable environment for raising their 3 children. 15 years later, the neighborhood was still safe and comfortable, but their days of raising children were starting to come to a close. 2 of their kids, 19-year-old Richard and 21-year-old Nancy, were now young adults in college. Their youngest child, Wendy, was only a week away from her 16th birthday. She had just received her learner's permit that morning, a significant milestone on her path to adulthood. It was a gorgeous Saturday, with temperatures in the mid-70s. Roland and his wife decided to take advantage of the sunny weather and play a round of golf at a local country club. Wendy was sunbathing on the flat roof outside of her bedroom window, and they asked her if she wanted to come along. She declined, saying she wanted to go to a nearby mall to get a birthday present for her brother. Her parents told her they would see her later in the afternoon and drove off. Although Wendy was only a week away from being able to drive, she still looked like she was about 12 years old. She was almost finished with her sophomore year at Pencrest High School, but she was still a petite 4'10", and only weighed about 90 pounds. With her 2 older siblings already in college, it was like she was an only child. She was extremely close with both of her parents, and never caused any trouble at home or in school. She hadn't shown any interest in dating yet, and she spent most of her free time at different church activities. She was a talented musician, playing both guitar and piano, and was scheduled to perform in a church concert later that evening. Her mother described her as being an idealist. Her favorite television show was The Waltons. Wendy laid out in the sun for a little while longer, then climbed back in her bedroom window and got dressed to go shopping. Her parents returned home from their outing around 5:30 p.m. and were surprised that Wendy wasn't at home. They had expected to find her getting ready for her concert performance that evening. She hadn't left a note like she normally did if she had a change in plans, so they thought perhaps she had just been running late with her shopping, and had gone directly to the church from there. Her parents checked her bedroom and didn't see anything unusual. Her bed wasn't made, but that was normal for her. She hated making her bed. It was one of those chores that just seemed like a waste of time when she knew she was just going to mess it up again later. Her bathing suit was crumpled on the middle of her bedroom floor, and she had listened to a John Denver record and not put the album back where it belonged, but for the most part her room was neat. Her purse was still in her bedroom, but she didn't always carry it with her if she was walking somewhere, preferring to just put her money in one of her pockets. While Joan and Roland weren't too worried about Wendy, they felt somewhat uneasy. Roland decided to make the 1.5-mile drive to the church where the concert was being held. He told himself that Wendy would definitely be at the church and he was just being paranoid. He parked outside the church and headed inside, where he found several of Wendy's friends. They told Roland that they hadn't seen Wendy and had been wondering where she was. Roland could feel himself starting to panic, but he forced himself to stay composed. He headed back home, praying that Wendy would be there. Unfortunately, she wasn't. Joan and Roland began calling all of Wendy's friends in the hopes that one of them would be able to tell them where she was. They called everyone they could think of, but no one had seen Wendy. One of Wendy's friends said that she had spoken to her earlier in the afternoon, but all she knew was that Wendy was planning on going to the mall. When they realized that none of Wendy's friends knew where she was, and no one had heard from her in hours, Roland and Joan began to panic. They were convinced that something bad had happened to their daughter. She had no prior history of running away, she was a good student, and she was very religious. Fearing the worst, they called the police, and reported her missing. After speaking with Roland and Joan, police agreed that Wendy did not fit the typical profile of a teenage runaway. They began going door to door in her neighborhood looking for anyone who may have seen her earlier that day. 3 neighbors had seen Wendy walking towards the mall a little after 3 p.m. Another neighbor saw her heading in the direction of the mall. He had to go back out a few minutes later and said that when he went down the same street at 3:17 p.m. he didn't see Wendy. He believed that she had probably been picked up on that road, since the 7 minutes that had elapsed wouldn't have given her enough time to walk down the entire length of the street. One of Wendy's classmates had seen her standing near the intersection of Indian Lane and Media Station Road sometime after 3:15 p.m. This was the last confirmed sighting of Wendy. Investigators could not find any witnesses who had seen her after this point. Investigators were unsure if Wendy had made it to the mall or not, but they believed that she did not. They brought in a tracking dog to try and confirm the path that Wendy had taken. The dog started in Wendy's bedroom, then led his handler away from Wendy's house and onto the road that led to the mall. The dog hesitated when he got to the intersection of Indian Lane and Media Station Road, where Wendy's classmate had reported seeing her. He then stopped completely and sat down, indicating that Wendy's trail had ended. The logical conclusion was that she had been picked up by someone at this point, but there was no way to tell which direction they had traveled in. It was a tough case to investigate. Detectives weren't sure if a crime had been committed or not. They didn't have a crime scene. There were no witnesses who had seen Wendy being pulled into a car. No one reported hearing any screaming, and there was no evidence of a roadside struggle. Her family and friends were confident that she would not have gotten into a car with someone she didn't know, so they assumed she had been familiar with the person. With that in mind, detectives began interviewing Wendy's classmates, friends from Girl Scouts, and people from her various church groups. None were able to shed any light on the disappearance. Wendy had not given any indication that she had been thinking of running away, and no one had any idea who might have picked Wendy up. If Wendy had known the people in the car, she must have met them outside of her normal social circles. The day after Wendy went missing, police received an interesting tip. An employee of a runaway hotline service in Chicago reported that they had received a call the day before from a girl who said she was a 15-year-old girl from media, and she was running away. No other details were given. Wendy was the only missing person who fit this description, but police were unable to determine if it was a legitimate call from Wendy, or if it had been made by someone who harmed Wendy and was trying to cover up their tracks. Whoever it was, they never called the hotline again. Wendy's parents remained convinced that she would not have left on her own, but it was beginning to look like that was exactly what she had done. They thought back over conversations they had with Wendy in the days leading up to her disappearance, wondering if there had been any warning signs that they might have missed. A couple of weeks before she went missing, Wendy had asked her parents if she could go to a religious camp that would be taking place in Colorado that summer. Several of her friends had already received permission to attend, but Wendy's parents told her they didn't think it would be possible for her to go. They had a small disagreement about it, and she had been disappointed, but they didn't think she had been so upset that she would run away over it. Just in case, a couple of investigators went to the camp when it was in session, but they found no evidence that Wendy was there. As months passed without any progress on the case, Roland tried to persuade the FBI to join in the investigation. He had no problem with the PA state troopers who were handling the case, but he knew that the FBI had access to more resources. Unfortunately, the FBI would only get involved in cases where there was clear evidence pointing to an abduction, and this didn't exist in Wendy's case. The Eatons began circulating a petition among their friends and co-workers in an attempt to get the FBI involved. The agency stood its ground. They sympathized with the Eatons, but with no evidence that an abduction had taken place, they simply couldn't get involved. When it became clear that the FBI was not going to assist in the case at all, Wendy's father decided to launch an investigation of his own. With the help of some of his co-workers at Sun Oil, where he worked as a marketing executive, Roland began raising money so they could offer a $5,000 reward for the recovery of Wendy. He also hired an ex-FBI agent to assist in the investigation. The Eatons would make hundreds of phone calls and travel to dozens of places as they attempted to find their daughter. They called every homeless and runaway shelter they could find. They passed out missing posters everywhere they went. Their once quiet, suburban life had become a roller coaster. Their hopes would rise with each new tip that came in, only to be dashed back to the ground when the tip failed to lead to Wendy. The Eatons had a bleak first Christmas without Wendy, who had been missing for 7 months by then. As they bid goodbye to 1975, they could only hope that 1976 would be a better year, and that they would have Wendy back with them for the next holiday season. A few days into the new year, there was a possible break in the case. Around 8:15 p.m. on January 5th, a male called the Eaton home and spoke with Roland. He claimed to know where Wendy could be found and said he would be willing to share that knowledge for $10,000. Roland had to think quickly. He didn't have access to $10,000 at the time. He asked the man if he would accept the payment in 2 parts. The man hung up, but called back the next morning. He instructed Roland to leave $5,000 cash, 10s and 20s only, in a trash can in Chester Park. Chester, a decaying city with a high crime rate, was only a 15-minute drive from Media. The man told Roland to have the money there before 3:30 p.m. and hung up. Roland called the police, and they quickly arranged a stakeout of the park. A 17-year-old boy was arrested when he showed up for the money. He told police there were 2 others who had been involved as well, 18-year-old Buck Jones and a 15-year-old juvenile. Police did not release the names of the juvenile offenders, but all 3 were charged with theft by extortion and criminal conspiracy. They admitted that they knew absolutely nothing about Wendy's location and had just been looking for an easy way to make some cash, a cruel trick to play on Wendy's parents. Police received numerous tips throughout January of 1976 regarding the possibility that Wendy was traveling with a religious group throughout Pennsylvania. Called the Forever Family, the fundamentalist Christian group had been founded in Allentown, PA in 1971. Stuart Trail, the founder of the group, was a former vacuum repairman who had been expelled from the Pentecostal church he attended. He decided to start his own church, based on the belief that only he could understand the true meaning of the Word of God. Many young teenagers joined the group, attracted by the communal lifestyle. They claimed they were simply a church group that believed in a literal approach to Bible interpretation. They were completely against the use of any narcotics or drugs, and all members were encouraged to donate $10 a month to be used for various charity projects. They wore pins proclaiming "Get Smart, Get Saved" while they wandered the streets looking for possible converts, and they used a hard sell approach when it came to trying to gain new members. The news media portrayed Forever Family in a far more sinister light, as a controversial religious cult that preyed on young teenagers and encouraged them to run away from home. Stuart Trail actively encouraged members to break off all contact with their families, and the group was rumored to be hiding close to 100 runaway children in various towns across the state. In January of 1976, group members were arrested for a number of reasons, mostly due to the aggressive style of preaching they used. Most commonly, they were arrested for blocking public sidewalks and disturbing the public with their incessant preaching. But they also had a tendency to get somewhat aggressive with potential converts and 2 members were arrested on harassment charges after they terrified a young teenage boy who didn't want to join their group. The boy was so scared he ran for his father, and the police were called. Police arrested the 2 men, and while they were at the police station they tried to convert all of the police officers on duty. Several people in the Wilkes-Barre Scranton area called police to report that Wendy had been seen selling candy door to door with other members of the group. A woman who had just broken away from the Forever family was shown a picture of Wendy to see if she recognized her. She did recognize her, and even called her by her nickname, Wizzy. She said she had met Wendy at a Forever family gathering in King of Prussia sometime in January. Investigators were cautiously optimistic, but Wendy's parents told reporters they weren't going to get their hopes up just yet. It was a prudent move. Detectives were able to track down the girl who had been seen selling candy. She looked as if she could have been Wendy's twin, but she wasn't Wendy. It's unclear if the girl seen selling candy in Scranton and the girl in King of Prussia were the same person. Although the Forever family yielded no clues about Wendy, it did give her parents a small spark of hope. They knew that Wendy had a strong faith in God, but they hadn't considered the possibility that she had left to join a cult. It was certainly a preferable alternative to assuming she had been kidnapped and murdered. The Eatons began learning all they could about various cults. They wrote to cult members, and even attended some cult rallies on the off chance that they would find Wendy. They checked out Rev. Sun Mying Moon's Unification Church. They even had a dentist compare Wendy's dental records to those of unidentified victims of the Jonestown mass suicide. Nothing brought them any closer to finding Wendy. By 1983, Wendy's parents had resigned themselves to the fact that they would probably never know for sure what had happened to their daughter. On August 2nd, they went to court and sat in silence, while Judge Francis Catania declared Wendy to be legally dead. While it wouldn't change the classification of the investigation, it would remain a missing person case, and not a homicide. It was a way for them to try to put some of the horror behind them. Over the years, police investigated thousands of leads. They interviewed anyone who knew Wendy at all. They investigated claims that Wendy had somehow gotten involved with a motorcycle group that had been responsible for the deaths of at least 4 other Delaware County women, but found absolutely nothing linking the crimes. They tracked down religious cults. They compared her dental records to those of unidentified dead from around the country. Detectives grow attached to victims and their families, especially in cases like this, where it drags on for years. They wanted to be able to give Wendy's family answers, but despite all the time and effort they put into the case, closure proved elusive. Both of Wendy's parents died without ever knowing what had happened to their daughter, Joan in 1995 and Roland in 2007. The police have never stopped looking for Wendy. They still review the case on a regular basis and hope that one day someone will come forward with the information needed to solve it, but they are also realistic. It's been more than 40 years since Wendy left her house to go shopping and never returned. Over the years there have been numerous theories about what happened to her, but little factual evidence to support any of them. It's possible that Wendy did leave voluntarily, either to join a religious cult, or for some other reason. If she did, she didn't take any of her belongings with her. Her purse was left behind, along with money and her learner's permit. She took no extra clothing. Perhaps most importantly, she didn't take any of her Bibles with her. If she had been planning to run away with a religious cult, it's hard to believe she would have gone without taking at least one of her Bibles. While she had argued with her parents about not being able to go to Colorado with a couple of her friends, she didn't seem angry enough to leave because of their decision. She had told her friends that she couldn't go, and she didn't say anything that led them to believe that she would leave home and travel to Colorado on her own. The idea that she left on her own was seen by her parents as the most appealing option, because it allowed them to believe that Wendy was still alive. It was impossible for investigators to track down every single cult in the country. If Wendy ran off with a religious group that managed to stay out of the headlines and off the police radar, she would have been virtually impossible to find. It's possible that she is still alive and well, but 40 years is a long time to stay hidden. When Wendy first went missing, her parents were convinced she had been kidnapped and murdered. Her father spent countless weekends taking his dogs on long hikes in wooded areas, always keeping an eye out for a body. He certainly didn't want to find her that way, and he wasn't sure how he would react if he ever did stumble upon human remains, but it was something he felt compelled to do. He said he felt guilty whenever he was at home, sitting around and doing nothing. He felt he owed it to his daughter to do everything possible to try to find her. At the time Wendy disappeared, police in several Delaware County towns were dealing with missing person cases of their own, all involving young women in their teens or early 20s. A total of 6 other girls went missing around that time, and 5 of their bodies would be found in the Tinicum area. Police considered that there was some kind of serial killer operating in the area, and they wondered if Wendy could have become a victim. Eventually they ruled that Wendy's disappearance was not related to the murder cases. While investigating the cases, police determined that all of the other women had known each other and had ties to a local motorcycle group called the Warlocks. Police determined that members of the motorcycle group were responsible for their deaths. Wendy had no ties to the Warlocks and had not known any of the other women, and police could not find any evidence linking the cases. Although they found no evidence indicating Wendy had been abducted, police couldn't rule out the possibility. There was nothing along the road where she was last seen to indicate that any sort of struggle had taken place, but Wendy was a tiny girl. She looked more like an elementary school student than a young woman about to turn 16. If someone had jumped out of a car and grabbed her, she wouldn't have been able to put up much of a fight. She could have been thrown into the back of a car before she had a chance to scream or try to run away. It would have been over in seconds. She wasn't careful. After reports came in that Wendy had been seen with the Forever family, investigators concentrated on the idea that she had voluntarily left home to join the cult. They theorized that Wendy had made arrangements with someone from that group to pick her up, and she willingly got into their car near the intersection of Indian Lane and Media Station Road. But why would she decide to meet them at an intersection, instead of at her home, or at the mall? Her parents had left to play golf, so she would have been aware of how much time she had before they returned home. If she had been in contact with Forever family members, it would have made more sense for them to pick her up from her house while her parents were still out. If she was afraid a neighbor would notice their car, having them meet her in the mall parking lot should have been the next logical choice. She was only a few blocks away from the mall, and getting into a car in a parking lot as opposed to an intersection would have attracted less attention. From witness statements and the path that was taken by the tracking dog, investigators were certain that Wendy got into a car at that intersection. If her friends and family were correct when they told investigators that Wendy would not have accepted a ride with someone she didn't know, then we can assume she definitely knew someone in the car. But this doesn't mean that the person in the car was from the Forever family or any other religious group. It could just have easily been a classmate or neighbor who happened to see Wendy walking and pulled over to offer her a ride. She would have accepted a ride with someone she thought she could trust. There is no way of knowing for certain what happened once she got into the car, but by the time she realized the person wasn't just giving her a ride to the mall, it would have been too late to do anything. She may have been dead before her parents even realized she was missing. This is just speculation. No evidence ever surfaced leading investigators to believe Wendy was dead, but it would explain why no one saw any type of struggle on the road and why Wendy did not take any of her belongings with her when she left. She most likely left her home that afternoon planning to be back in a couple of hours, and never imagined her short walk to the mall would turn into a 4-decade hunt for answers. Wendy Eaton was 15 years old when she disappeared. She is a white female with brown hair and hazel brown eyes. She was around 4'10" and weighed about 90 pounds at the time. She is left-handed, sometimes wore eyeglasses, and is deaf in her right ear. If you have any information regarding Wendy, please contact the Pennsylvania State Police at 610-459-4150.
Number 2.
In 2017, Mrs. Evans carried a decades-long heartbreak of a missing son to her North Watertown Cemetery grave. I've always been a storyteller, and I'm interested in history and the little people stories, the individual stories of people who move in and out of history, Ms. Good said. I want everybody to know these names. Ms. Good is founder and the curator of the Charlie Project, a website database that profiles over 14,000 cold case missing people cases, mainly from the United States. She does not actively investigate cases. Her website is a publicity vehicle for missing people. I just want to catalog them, so that people can see their faces and names and remember them, Ms. Good said in a phone interview from her home in Ohio. I feel it's a duty. Usually, emotions don't enter into it. But local emotions were refreshed earlier this spring, when local social media carried a link to one of the 14,000 cold cases listed on the Charlie Project. Shawn Wayne Evans was aged 2 when he disappeared from his home May 17, 1984 on Water Street in Watertown. He was outside playing when his mother went inside to answer a telephone call. Shawn was in the driveway with a ball and his brother Stephen, slightly younger, was in a playpen. When she returned about 5 minutes later, her blonde-haired, green-eyed Shawn had disappeared. She notified city police at 5:49 p.m. and provided a description of what Shawn was wearing, a yellow jacket, red pants and blue sneakers with white stripes. Also, Shawn had a birthmark, 1 inch in length, between his shoulder blades, and a scar and another birthmark on his forehead. The boy is believed to have fallen into the river behind his home next to the Pearson and Timmerman Incorporated building, 914 Water Street, after he had been left outside for a few minutes by his mother, Connie, the Watertown Daily Times reported on May 18, 1984. But Shawn's sister, Tracy Evans, is not convinced, especially since a body has never been recovered. She carries on a skepticism shared by her mother, who believed that Shawn was abducted, and that he could still be alive, somewhere. For my mom, it was obviously a big deal for her, Ms. Evans, Lowville, said. She never gave up hope. For the longest time, she was still involved with the police and stuff. And she would have flyers updated. Ms. Evans was born in 1985 to Connie F. and Francis William Evans, a year after Shawn disappeared. Her parents, she said, divorced in 1988 or 89. Connie, Tracy's mom, was 54 when she died July 22, 2017 at her Dexter home. What is especially difficult for the family, Ms. Evans said, is that there has been no closure surrounding Shawn's death. It always bothered my mom, Ms. Evans said. Even as I got older, Mom never stopped talking about it. The month of May, when Shawn disappeared, and November, the month of his birthday, were especially difficult for her mom. She would break down non-stop, Ms. Evans said. The Evans family continues to celebrate Shawn's birthday, November 25. The year that my mom passed away, and the anniversary day he went missing, we did a cookout to remember Shawn, Ms. Evans said. It was rather strange, but we all try to do something in remembrance of Shawn, because we've never forgotten about him. Francis Wallace Evans, 3 Mile Bay, was born in 1988. His mom also regularly reminded him of his missing older brother. I just try to stay positive about it, Mr. Evans said. Mom always thought he was out there, so we thought the same thing. He was kidnapped as a young boy, and he didn't know any difference, that he was kidnapped or not. He just grew up not knowing he was abducted, or whatever. That's how I think about it anyway. Whether it's true or not is beside the point, I guess. But they never found a body in the Black River. Mr. Evans became the main keeper of the flame involving Shawn's case after his mom died. I took over everything and talked to detectives about it, and they say they're still searching or whatnot, he said. I don't think they gave up on him. One searcher on May 17, 1984, the day Shawn disappeared, reported finding sneaker tracks leading to the river's edge. The report in the Times did not indicate what size the tracks appeared to be. To me, I'm thinking, did somebody take him and go that way near the water to kind of let the trace off? Ms. Evans said. She said that her mom always maintained that Shawn was frightened of water. She said even giving him a bath, he would scream in the bathtub. He did not like water. It was always a big thing. She was like, no way. He knew not to go near the water. In 2017, Ms. Evans created a Facebook page about her missing brother. It is still a mystery of what happened to him. Many of us believe he is still out there, the page says. Shawn's father, Francis William Evans, town of Pamelia, said he was out job hunting when Shawn came up missing. I've never given up, he said on Finding Answers. Francis William Evans said he's attended local rallies over the years concerning missing children, and believes more people need to be aware of those related dangers. People need to know, he said. People don't talk about it enough. He said it's kind of freaky to see kids wandering by themselves. There's nothing you can do about it, he said. It's not like you can step out and say, go back home, or whatever. Some parents just don't realize what's out there. When I do get the opportunity to talk to people, I tell them the way it is. You just don't know. Tracy Evans is very cautious when it comes to her children. Because of the Shawn thing, I'm a paranoid mom, she said. My kids aren't allowed out of my sight. I freak out over little things. Stephen A. Evans, 37, Brownville, was in the playpen when his brother, Shawn, disappeared that May day in 1984. Stephen was about age 1 at the time. Stephen recalled that as he got older, he remembers his family getting phone calls from out of state reporting sightings of Shawn, but nothing came of those reports. Color posters and advertising cards with Shawn's picture were distributed nationwide. I'm thinking he's still out there, Stephen said. From what I was told, he was scared of water, so I know he didn't go into the Black River. If you're scared of something, you won't go near it. Tracy alleges some weird stuff occurred over the years relating to Shawn's disappearance. I recall the shoes that he was wearing that day were randomly mailed to us, she said. Her 2 brothers and her father don't recall any mention of that occurrence. And she said a couple of days before it happened, there was a vehicle that kept parking up the street, but she never put 2 and 2 together, Ms. Evans said of her mom. I don't know why you wouldn't, but maybe that's just me learning from my mom's lessons. But if somebody is parking next to my house, I'd be freaking out. My kids aren't going to be out there. The city police department maintains a multitude of material related to the case of Shawn W. Evans. In late May, an active follow-up on his case began. Detective Sergeant Joseph A. Giaquinto of the Watertown City Police Department was asked about Tracy's recollections on the shoes and the vehicle that she claimed her mom saw, and particularly if those statements were also in the material the police have on the case. We are talking about boxes of documents, so I can't comment on that, Detective Sergeant Giaquinto said. He added that he has no opinion as to what happened to Shawn. We're going to treat it as anything is possible, Detective Sergeant Giaquinto said. Maybe he did go in the water, maybe he got picked up and was raised somewhere else. I'm really open to anything. We are coming at it with fresh eyes, because it has been reassigned down through the years. I don't believe there was a time when it wasn't assigned to somebody. Fresh eyes and new technology assist in such cases, he said. Every time it's passed on to a new investigator here, it's a different perspective, Detective Sergeant Giaquinto said. Every detective is different and sometimes people come up with fresh ideas to approach things. It's not something we're going to give up on. One way or another, our goal is to find answers for the family. Detective Sergeant Giaquinto was 2 when Shawn disappeared, but he said time doesn't play into the case. Such cases aren't forgotten. If we don't have it figured out, then when my time is done, we'll go on to somebody else. It's not going anywhere. I'd like to see it solved very much myself. The Charlie Project was named in honor of Charles Brewster Ross, who was abducted from his home in Germantown, Pennsylvania, on July 1, 1874, when he was 4 years old. The search for him attracted international attention, and his case was one of the first highly publicized situations in the U.S. involving a missing child. Charlie's fate was never discovered. The website began as the Missing Persons Cold Case Network, founded in 2001 by Jennifer Mara. It was designed as a publicity vehicle for cold cases of missing people. In 2003, she turned over the site to Ms. Good. She ran it until March 2004, when it was attacked by hackers and was taken offline. Ms. Good founded the Charlie Project in October 2004, which contains much of the content of the former MPCCN. Ms. Good, 34, was diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum 11 years ago. She believes the intense focus that often comes with having autism has made the Charlie Project a success. When asked how much time she devotes to it, she said it kind of varies. There have been times when I've done like bursts of weeks, working 12 to 14-hour days on it, Ms. Good said. And then I'll sputter to a stop for a while. I'm bipolar, so that's part of it. The work brings her rewards. Especially when I hear from people whose loved one is on there and it's like, I didn't know that anybody cared anymore. One section of the Charlie Project is for resolved cases, such as when someone is found alive. A lot of times when they're found alive, I'll just remove that, because I don't want to interfere with their privacy, Ms. Good said. It depends on what the circumstances are. If there are news articles about the person being found, the horse has already left the barn. But sometimes, I hear from the person themselves. It's like, yeah, I was missing, and that was a different part of my life, and now I'm trying to apply for jobs and stuff, and it's kind of interfering with that. Of course, I will want to remove them, and will remove the case with no problems. Missing children cases are especially tragic for Ms. Good. This is an open wound, she said of Shawn's case. People talk about having their child die as a parent's worst nightmare. That's actually not true. It's worse having your kid disappear and never knowing what happened to him. She has some personal experience in that regard. 2 of my brothers have died, so my parents have lost 2 children, Ms. Good said. This is obviously a terrible thing, and they never really got over it. But as a family, we've been able to put our lives back together and still be happy. This has not destroyed us. From what I've seen, a lot of times having a kid disappear and never knowing, or getting the closure, can destroy people. The Evans family still awaits that closure. It'd be nice to find him. I'd definitely tell him, welcome back, and show him around, Stephen A. Evans said. At least spend some time with him, before I got to know him. I'd probably hug him, and never let him go, Tracy said. Shawn has never been found, and his disappearance remains unsolved. Some agencies continue to list Shawn as a possible non-family abduction. If you have any information concerning this case, please contact Watertown Police Department 315-782-2233.
Number 3.
Jillian was last seen in Norfolk, Nebraska on August 13, 1987. She was visiting her father, Roger Kutchell, and her stepmother at the time of her disappearance. Her parents had been divorced at the time. She lived in Kansas with her mother, Joyce Kutchell, and her brother at the time of her disappearance. Roger and his wife resided in the McNeely apartments at the time. Jillian was known to not like staying in the apartment alone when they were at work. Jillian started to walk to a babysitter's residence which was located 4 blocks away from her residence. Jillian never arrived at the babysitter's residence. Jillian's disappearance was not noticed until 3 p.m. of that day. Her babysitter naturally assumed that Jillian had decided to stay home that day. Her stepmother drove to the sitter's home to find that Jillian never came to residence. Her disappearance was reported immediately after. Authorities suspect that Jillian was abducted while walking to her babysitter's home. 3 months after she vanished, her clothing and other items were found at the Wood Duck Wildlife Refuge located in Stanton, Nebraska. This was a considerable 10 miles away from where Jillian vanished. Authorities believe that Jillian was taken by David C. Phelps, a man who lived in Roger's apartment building and had previously met Jillian. He had been molesting young children since he was in his teens. He preferred blonde girls with blue eyes in the ages of 4 to 6 years. He stated he did like Jillian's blue eyes, but said she was too old for his preference liking. Phelps became a suspect after a tip in 1988 led Joyce Kutchell to him. In 1989, Phelps confessed to assisting another man, Kermit Baumgartner, in molesting Kutchell. He stated that he and Kermit took Jillian to Wildlife Refuge, where he held Jillian down while Baumgartner molested her. Phelps stated he got nervous and left Jillian with Kermit while he drove back home. He stated he never saw Jillian again. Kermit has a record for sexual assault. Phelps was able to perfectly describe Jillian's clothing. Kermit denied being involved in Jillian's abduction. He has never been charged in her disappearance, and Phelps later recanted the statement and stated that it was coerced by a PI. Phelps and Baumgartner left the state soon after and moved to different states. Phelps was later indicted for kidnapping Jillian with intent to defile. He was convicted in the spring of 1991 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. This came after Joyce started a petition that would force a jury to charge him. Jillian remains missing, and although she was declared legally deceased, no one has been charged with killing her. Her case remains unsolved. If you have any information concerning this case, please contact Norfolk Police Department 402-644-8700.
Number 4.
William Gaffney was last seen on February 11, 1927, while playing with 2 boys who were his neighbors. The boys were aged 3 and 12. They were last seen playing in the hallway outside their apartments. The older boy returned to his apartment for a brief amount of time, and when he returned, both William and the younger boy were gone. Soon after the boys vanished, the younger 3-year-old boy was found on the roof of the apartment buildings. He was questioned in regards to Gaffney's whereabouts, and he said that a bougie man had taken William. Investigators initially believed the child had simply wandered away. They searched the surrounding areas and canals, but found no trace of the child. After the searches turned up no sign of the boy, authorities then concluded that Gaffney was the victim of an abduction. Later in the day after William vanished, a streetcar motorman, Joseph Meehan, stated that he saw an elderly man attempting to calm down a small child. The boy did not have any winter attire on even though it was cold, and he kept saying he wanted to go home and see his mother. Meehan later said the boy was William. Authorities and investigators initially believed that serial killer Peter Kudczynski may have been involved in Gaffney's abduction. They did not have any evidence to connect him to Gaffney's disappearance. Peter did commit many of his crimes during the time that William vanished, and he also murdered children. William's case received media attention, but his kidnapping remained a mystery until 1934, 7 years after he was taken. Albert Fish, a cannibalistic pedophile killer, led authorities to the remains of another child he killed in 1928, Grace Budd. When his picture made the newspapers, Joseph Meehan stated that Albert was the man he saw with William the day he vanished. Fish confessed to kidnapping, torturing, and killing Gaffney. He stated he cannibalized a portion of Gaffney's remains and disposed of the rest in a coastal area in northern New York. He is also a suspect in the killings of other children. William's case was originally investigated by New York police, but the case has since been closed following the confession Fish gave to authorities. William's mother remained doubtful that Albert killed her son, but the evidence against Fish was strong. William's remains were never found, but foul play is suspected in his case. William's case was considered closed after Meehan's identification and Fish's confession. It is no longer being investigated by law enforcement. His remains have never been found, however.
Number 5.
Judith was last seen on the night of June 5, 1982, after attending a party in Billerica, Massachusetts. She was attending the party with her fiancé. They had been engaged for 4 months. During the party, they got into a fight which resulted in Judith driving him home, and her returning to the party herself. Witnesses told authorities and investigators that Judith left the party at approximately 2 a.m. in her black 1972 or 1977 Dodge Dart. She was never seen or heard from again, and her car was also never recovered. Authorities believe that Judith might have been the victim of foul play. Investigators that worked on Judith's case received a tip from the United States Secret Service in Washington, D.C. At the time, they were investigating a counterfeiting operation. One of the men involved in the ring, James Mitchell Deber-Delebin, is considered a suspect in Judith's disappearance. He is believed to have committed many crimes against women. In November of 1983, United States Secret Service agents searched James' Virginia residence and found journals, tapes, and photographs of various women. They were being forced to do sadomasochistic acts against their will. He is suspected of attacking and killing many women. James apparently had a thing for brunette females. Judith was a brunette. He was also once considered a suspect in the 1982 presumed abduction of Kelly Brownlee from Michigan. She has never been found, but she fits Deber-Delebin's description of women he preferred. At the time of her disappearance, Judith was employed as an employee at a fast food restaurant in the Chelmsford area. Her mother told authorities that a male coworker allegedly harassed Judith, and she was frightened of him. It's unknown if he's a suspect in Judith's disappearance or not. While it was apparent that Judith was going through a rebellious stage at the time of her disappearance, her brother, Joe, stated that Judith would never have run away. She was close to him and her mother, and would never abandon them. She may have been involved with criminal activities and drugs at the time of her disappearance. Oddly, the day prior to her disappearance, Judith asked her father to look in the trunk of her car and open it, because she was too scared to do this by herself. Judith's family believes that she met with foul play at the hands of someone that Judith was acquainted with. It's possible that someone who was at the party knows more about Judith's disappearance than anyone. Sometime after she went missing, an unidentified woman called the Chartier family and stated she knew the fate of Judith. She stated she could not say any more as her life had been threatened. Judith's case remains unsolved and foul play is suspected. If you have any information concerning this case, please contact Chelmsford Police Department 978-256-2521.
Number 6.
Larry Perry was last seen on May 22, 1979 in Dumfries, Virginia. He ate supper at his home he shared with his maternal grandparents and left the home at approximately 8 p.m. He was seen chasing a four-wheel pickup truck. He was never seen or heard from again. Larry's grandparents reported his disappearance at 12 a.m. when they couldn't find him. Extensive searches of the area turned up no sign of Larry. His grandmother stated he was very trusting, which could have made him an easy target. Investigators believe he was abducted by the man driving the truck. A day after Larry's disappearance, authorities questioned Michael Carl George. He was the man who drove the vehicle that Larry was seen chasing after. He initially denied knowing or speaking to the boy in the evening that Larry vanished. In August of 1982, he confessed to what occurred on the evening of Larry's disappearance. He stated that he went target shooting and that Larry followed him to the area. He stated that Larry shot himself by accident because he left his pistol in the hood of his truck while he attended to another gun. He apparently had his back turned to the child. He apparently panicked and buried Larry's body in a ravine and covered it with branches and leaves. Authorities searched the region for Larry's remains, but his body was not located. Authorities do not believe the story of Larry accidentally shooting himself. They believe Michael killed him intentionally. Authorities could not prove intentional murder, even though he was originally charged with it. He pleaded guilty to abduction and involuntary manslaughter in 1984, but only served 2 years, and then was released in 1986. George would later go on to kidnap, torture, and murder Alexander Eugene Stanko in 1990. He also claimed to have murdered another person, but this has not been confirmed with or by official sources. Michael was executed in 1997. Larry has never been found. His case remains unsolved and foul play is suspected in the case. If you have any information concerning this case, please contact Prince William County Sheriff's Office 703-792-7200.